Okay, well, we are in part 2 of our reconfirming deal. And we have some people here that have been going through our confirmation class on Wednesday nights. You like it? You're on the spot, so if you say no, out you go. So that's pretty much how that works. They have inspired us. People like her have inspired me to re-energize what we call... Oh, there's another one. You're in confirmation class too. She missed last Wednesday, so I'm not talking to her. They have really inspired me that we need a reboot every once in a while. We need to re-energize our faith, because the most important thing that we have in this world is our faith. Without that, we're done. It doesn't matter our goals of career. It doesn't matter our goals of friendship. It doesn't matter our goals of love. Nothing matters if we do not have our faith. And every once in a while, it's important for us to say, I need to reboot that. I need to revive that a little bit. I need to put a fire under that again and remember why I am here and who is here for me. And that's why we're starting from the beginning. And we're learning, last week we learned a little bit about Adam and Eve, about the tree of knowledge. We learned a little bit about Abraham and the sacrifice that he made of his son to kind of challenge his faith, because he's the first person that is going to carry the word of God to the people. In a sense, he's the first preacher. And he has to be ready. He has to be ready to carry this message, this important message. So now we take back to 4,000 years ago, and we are going to meet Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. We're going to meet his son, Jacob. This is an interesting story, because Jacob is a twin. He's kind of like, I have a lot in common with Jacob, because he was a fraternal twin. I'm a fraternal twin. And he and his brother were nothing alike. Just like me and my brother, we are nothing alike. We do not even look like brothers. We are that different. When we were kids, I used to just beat the crap out of my brother all the time. And then he became a football player and a framer, and now I have nothing but respect for him. And I ask him if he needs anything, but we are completely opposite people. Jacob was the opposite of Esau, his brother. Esau was a very muscular guy. He was like the football player, like the hero, and he was just filled with hair. I mean, he had hairy arms. He had a hairy chest. He had that hairy back. I bet he even had a hairy butt. This is a hairy guy, Jacob was different. Jacob was a kind of a timid guy. He was known as a man of heart, a man that would care for his father and sit at home. And he respected the word of God. He really respected that, and he was very adamant about that. Now remember, at this time, it was very important that you did not intermarry with other faiths. At this time, we've got the Canaanites, we've got the Hittites. These are people that were worshiping like pagan gods and things like that. Abraham was very strict on, if we're going to worship this God, if we're going to carry this message, we need to keep it true. We need to not dilute this with other things. Esau was a hunter. He was really good with his hands. He was a hunter, and he was also a lover of women. And he didn't care who they were. He married Hittite women. He married people outside of his family, outside of his faith. He didn't care. And then we have Jacob, who was just waiting to do the right thing, to marry within the faith. And usually at this time, that still meant you married like your cousin or something like that. They were twins, but as we know, one of them has to come out first. Esau came out first. And as a matter of fact, Esau came out first, but Jacob was actually holding on to the heel of his foot when he came out. They had been fighting in the womb for who was going to come out first. Much like my brother and I. My brother and I, well, he weighed 8.5 pounds. I weighed 10. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My mom gets a huge Mother's Day card every year. And we were fighting to get out, and we were born cesarean. But back then, this is what happened. And Esau's mom, Rebecca, asked God, why is this such a troublesome birth? Why are these two fighting so much? Why is one, this smooth baby holding on to the heel of this fur ball? It's like she gave birth to a tribble, That's a Star Trek joke. I don't know if anybody gets that. Hairy thing. He was hairy at birth. I mean, he was just hairy. And God said, they are going to be fighting most of their lives, but the younger son will be held over the older son. See, back then, birthright meant a huge deal. If you were the next in line, we hear the old saying, like a father will say, well, I'm gone, but you're the man of the house now. This was a huge deal. The next in line, birth-wise, was the one that after the father died, after Isaac died, Esau would be in charge of the family. He would decide the fate of the family. He would get the rights of the oldest. There was a problem with that, though. You see, because it was kind of obvious that if Esau took over, the faith was just pretty much going to die, because Esau was kind of compulsive and whatever whim, and he really didn't care about this faith that was supposed to be carried on to where 4,000 years we would still have it. Jacob had that faith, and his mother knew that. At one time, Esau was out there hunting. Jacob sat there, and he was cooking this meal, this really good meal, and it was like a lentil soup kind of thing, okay? And Esau comes back and he says, I'm famished. I'm so hungry. Give me some of that food. Jacob says, well, I'll give you that, but in exchange, I want your birthright. I want you to give me your birthright. In other words, I want you to acknowledge that I'm first. And Esau did. For a taste of soup, he gave away his birthright. Now, this is a pretty good example of that the faith is not going to really last with Esau, because he's that compulsive. He thinks not in the day or in long term. He thinks in the second. I'm hungry, I'll give away my birthright, I don't care. So, and I'll marry people out of the faith, I'll do all this stuff. So Jacob knows this, and his mom knows this. And it comes time where Isaac is getting old, very, very old. He is worked in the fields all his life. His hands are calloused. Anybody that's a farmer and everything, their hands do not look like mine. My hands are like 2-year-old baby hands. You got hands that are rough because you have worked. That's what Isaac's hands are like. And he's also going blind. He can't see. He tells Esau, I want you to go out and go hunt. Make me a really nice meal, my favorite meal, and I'm going to give you my blessing. That meant a big deal. Remember, we are in the, and it still actually is relevant in the Middle East. We still have people where honor is a huge part of them. Respect who you are, your family line, huge. So for Isaac to say, I'm going to give Esau my blessing, that means forget the birthright. If I give Esau my blessing, he's in charge. He's in charge of the land. He's in charge of everything. And as a matter of fact, what I'm doing is I'm proclaiming to God that I want all of God's blessings to fall on Esau because he's the oldest. Rebecca hears this. She hears this and she says, no, they ain't going to work, okay? Because she knows that Jacob is the man of the faith. And she remembers what God said about that the older is going to actually follow the younger. And so what does she do? she plans to rip them off in the only way that they have. Esau goes out for the hunt to go prepare that meal. Meanwhile, Rebekah, she comes over to Jacob and she says, I'm going to prepare the meal, and you're going to pretend that you're Esau. And Jacob says, how am I going to do that? Esau is hairy, and I am not. Dad's going to know that I'm not my brother. And she said, don't worry about that. I got that all planned out. She was a crafty one. She was really, really crafty. She said, I'm going to prepare the meal, and then she took the skin of goats, and she wrapped it around Jacob's arms and wrapped it around the back of his neck. And she gave him some of Esau's clothes that he had worn so it actually smelled like Esau. I'm guessing Esau, out there doing that stuff, you could probably smell him coming, a mile away. And so she dressed him like this. And she said, while he's still out there hunting, I want you to go in, tell your dad that you're Esau, and I want you to steal that blessing. And that's what Jacob did. He prepares he gives the food from his mom, prepares it in a nice way, brings it into his dad. And his dad said, who is that? And he said, well, this is Esau. And his dad said, well, wait a minute, you sound like Jacob. Come here, let me feel you. So he gives him the arm with the skin on it. And remember, his hands are pretty callous, so he can't tell. He just knows the texture. So he's got a furry arm. And he smells him. And he said, well, the voice sounds a little bit like Jacob, but gosh, you feel and you smell like Esau. So you must be Esau. So he gives him the food, and he eats, and then he gives him the blessing. It's a big blessing. He's asking God in front of Jacob to bless him with cattle, to bless him with all that he does, with family, with that lineage, to carry on the word of God. You are now the next in line. I was the next in line from Abraham. You're the third that's going to carry this message. Jacob says, hey, thanks. He bolts it out of there. Meanwhile, Esau comes back, and he says, got the food, Dad. Dad says, who are you? And he says, I'm Esau. And he realizes that he has been ripped off by his brother. Now, remember the type of guy that Esau is. He doesn't stop and think. He just says, I'm going to kill my brother. He took away my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing. He's dead to me. So much so that Rebekah knows this. And she says, Jacob, you got to leave. You got to get out of town for your very life to protect not only yourself, but protect that word that you have to carry on. I want you to go to my brother, and I want you to marry one of his daughters. So Jacob packs up in the night, and he sneaks out of town while Esau is basically there sharpening his knives, wanting to kill him. And he bolts it, and he leaves. On his way, he has a very strange experience. On his journey, he stops for the night, and he beds down. And he takes this rock for a pillow, which is really, a rock for a pillow. How about dirt? But he takes a rock, and he lays down, and he has this dream where suddenly he sees this long stairway. And on this stairway, he is seeing angels coming up and down the stairway. And then he hears God say, this is the holy ground. This is where God comes and goes. This is the place, not now, but this is the place where you are going to be the land of God, right here. So he wakes up, and he puts like this, he makes kind of a ritual thing where he puts oil on the rock, and he makes kind of this altar, and he says, this is obviously the land of God. This is the holiest of holy grounds. This is where God basically lives. But he's not ready for him yet. He still has to go. He goes to his brothers, his mother's brothers. Again, we are in the early times, and these guys were not the most sophisticated people. They intermarried. They were a reality show waiting to happen. I mean, any one of the Old Testament people could be on the Jerry Springer show and get really good ratings, because this is the weirdest kind of stuff that happened, but this is the way that they lived. He goes to the brother's house, and he meets Rachel. Rachel is this drop-dead gorgeous gal. I mean, she is a hottie. So much so that the first thing he does when he sees her is he plants one on her. He kisses her. He's so taken aback. He said, this is it. This is the one I'm going to marry. I am so in love with her. He meets the dad, who introduces him to Leah, Rachel's older sister. You got Rachel, hey, oh, she's hot, and then Leah, oh, whoa, she's been spending too much time in the dark, and thank God she needs to be there, because she was not, the nice one, I mean, you had, basically night and day. So he goes to the dad, and he says, I want to marry Rachel. And he says, well, it's not really our custom, because usually remember, we got the lineage thing happening here. It's not our custom. Leah's the oldest. But he says, I know, but, I want to marry, the hottie. I want Rachel. And he says, well, I'll tell you what. You don't have a dowry. You've lost everything because you had to flee because your brother's trying to kill you. So there's nothing that you can give me. I tell you what, you work for me in my fields for 7 years. You work for me for 7 years, and I'll give you Rachel. Now, this girl must have been really something, because he said, okay, I'll do it. And he works for 7 years. He works in the fields. He's getting his hands dirty. 7 years. You would think in the first 2, he'd think, she's not that attractive. I mean, I could go somewhere else for this. But he is, wants that lineage and everything like that. So for 7 years, he works. And the day comes, and he's pounding on the dad's door, and he says, this is the day. Let me have Rachel. And he said, okay, all right. We'll have a ceremony, and I'll give you Rachel. So they have this big ceremony, and when they had the ceremony, they had all this wine and everything, and they're having this party. And Jacob's getting drunk. He's getting sauced. He's getting spiffed. And he goes in, and he marries. In that time, they had the little drapery and everything like that. And you know what's coming. He goes in, and the next morning, he wakes up, and he realizes that he has married Leah. Oh, he's not a happy camper at all. A couple of us in college, we've had nights like that. It's not a happy thing. He is irate. He runs to the dad. He says, you have ripped me off. And the dad said, it's just our tradition. But I tell you what, you work for me for another 7 years, I'll let you marry Rachel right now. And so he agrees. So he marries now Rachel. He's got Leah. He's got 2 wives and 7-year commitment again to work the fields. Now, for some reason, everything that he touched was turning to gold. If he worked a field, it prospered. The goats and the lambs and everything, they would just be really good and everything like that. So he was doing pretty good. The only problem that was happening was that Rachel could not have kids. As much as they tried, Rachel could not have kids. Now, you might think that there's got to be a time where Jacob is thinking to himself, I just ripped off my brother, and now I just got ripped off. So I'm kind of learning a lesson here, and he's filled with guilt still for his brother. Remember, Jacob is not the guy. He is the feeler. He is the guy that is emotional, so he feels this stuff. So he's been carrying this guilt all along. He has several kids with Leah. That's right. The one that he didn't want to marry, he is still having kids with. Because remember, regardless, it wasn't about the love as much as it was about the lineage. It was still important for him to carry on that line. Finally, he does have a child with Rachel. And they call him Joseph. And Joseph is the one we're going to be talking about next week. But there's something that's happening. The 7 years are up. And Jacob knows that he has to go make peace with his brother. This means for 14 years, he's been carrying this guilt. Regardless of what's happened to him, regardless of whether or not he was okay with carrying on the line, he still ripped off his brother and basically sent him out with nothing. And he's carrying that guilt for 14 years. He's struggling. No matter if it's God's call or not, he is saying, this is not good. I don't like this. And on his way, he sends a note, a messenger out to Esau, and he says, I want to meet with you. The man that wants to kill him. And so to make sure that he's safe, he's got Leah with her kids, and he sends her this route. He's got Rachel with her kids, sends her this route, and he goes it alone. And that night, as he's in the dark, a being comes and wrestles him and fights him. So much so that they fight continuously all night long. And that by the morning, he's got a socket problem in his hip. And from then on, Jacob walked with a limp. And at the end of the morning, the person that he was fighting said, let go. Let go. We've been fighting all night. Let go. And said, who are you? And he said, I'm God. What form do you suppose God took? What human form do you suppose God took at that time? Keep in mind the old message, before Abraham, I am. And God says, from now on, your name is no longer Jacob. From now on, your name is Israel. That's how we got the name Israel. Because Israel means wrestles with God. And they've been doing it ever since, haven't they? Wrestles with God. And he says, you've wrestled with God and you've won. Your name is now Israel. And on that name, I will build my lineage. And you, basically, he gives the same promise as he gave to Abraham. You will have as many kids as the stars. Now, wrestling with God. What do you suppose he was wrestling about? There are times in our lives when we got something that God says, you got to let this go. You got to let me handle this. And how many times do we say, I can't. I'm too guilty. Or I'm too worried. I can't. There's times when we want to trust God, but we still want to hang on to that worry or that resentment or that our own little feelings there to make us not healed. There's some of us that have been Israel much of our lives. We have been wrestling with God much of our lives. We have been holding on where we want to just release it and let go. There's an old saying in AA, it's called let go and let God. In other words, leave it to God's hands. Let him take care of it. Had he left it to God's hands in the first place, they might not have even ripped off Esau. God might have had a completely other plan for this. But it's the way it happened, and God is saying, take that guilt, that worry, that resentment, that fear, give it to me. Just give it to me and let it go. Stop wrestling me. And when God said that he won, that doesn't mean that he pounced him in the face and he said, uncle. It means he finally let go. You won because you gave it to me. You wrestled with me all night with this guilt, this remorse, this worry, this hatred, this judgment. You wrestled with it all night, and by the time this night was over, you finally let me have it. And I can take that from you, and I can heal you from that. And after that, Jacob went and he saw Esau. And at this time, he had no more guilt, but he had humility. And he bowed 7 times on his way to Esau. 7 times. He had the ability, even though that he was in charge, to say, Esau, you are my brother, and I apologize, and I'm okay. 7 times. And he was able to make peace with his brother. And when Isaac died, they were both able to bury him. Esau learned, and Jacob learned, that when it comes to letting go of things, you got to give it to God. Because if you just try to put it aside, you're going to pick that up again. And some of us have been carrying around stuff for more than 14 years. Some of us worry about all kinds of stuff. We worry about things in our lives. We worry about things in the church. We worry about change. We worry about the holidays. We worry about people that we have wronged. We worry about people that have wronged us. And God is saying, stop wrestling. Just let it go. Just let it go. Be Israel. Wrestle with God and win by letting it go. Because this is just life. This is just life. God is better than life. God is more important than anything, and he can handle it. That's why he's there. That's why he came down in human form and wrestled Jacob. And again, what form do you think he took? When God comes down to earth to talk to Adam and Eve, or to visit Abraham, or to wrestle Jacob, what form do you think God takes? I think we'll know Christmas. I think we'll realize what it is. God is better than life. So I invite you all to let it go. Whatever you're carrying, just let it go. And celebrate that God's better than life.